This is the eLearn Podcast, episode 95.
From the student's point of view, what is the difference between watching a live video or watching a video and engaging in a live class?
Mm-hmm.
You get a sense that the teacher, hopefully, you get a sense the teacher cares about you. The teacher is aware and they care.
Welcome to the eLearn Podcast. My name is Laddick, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. My guest for today is Fred Dixon. He's the CEO of BlindSide Networks and the product manager of the ultra-famous Moodle plugin, BigBlueButton. In this connected conversation, Fred and I discuss how BigBlueButton grew exponentially during the pandemic and the fact that it's baked into the Moodle core software in version 4.0. We also talk about what it means to focus on a single market, which is in this case online learning, and the core offerings of integration, engagement, and analytics for improving learning. We also talk about what Fred sees that the critical challenges are that we're working on today in online learning delivery, especially in terms of synchronous learning and how this is being addressed. We also talk about why Fred thinks being back in class physically is important, but that virtual learning is not only here to stay, but a critical component for the future. We also discuss what it means for technology to be open source and why this is important as a movement and as a way to develop great tech that's powerful and secure. And then finally, we end our conversation talking about the business acumen needed around open source in order to make it viable. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors.
The eLearning podcast is sponsored by the eLearn Success Series, a uniquely valuable set of events that bring together sector experts and thought leaders to offer solutions to the most critical challenges and issues at the intersection of education and technology. Get your free ticket to all 4 sessions at elearnsuccessseries.com. And OpenLMS, a company that provides world-class LMS solutions that empower organizations to meet education and workplace learning needs. Learn more by visiting openlms.net.
Hi, Fred. How are you?
Good.
Excellent. I was just saying hello to all of our people watching us out there on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Facebook. Sorry for a little delay here. We had some technical difficulties in the background, but that is the beauty of the online universe. If you're flying without a net, you just got a deal. So appreciate you taking a few minutes to look at some of our past episodes here. But Fred Dixon, the man, the myth behind BlindSide Networks and a open source, mega. I'm trying to figure out how do you characterize BigBlueButton correctly? How do you give it enough emphasis?
But thanks, Steve. I can give you a quick.
How are you today?
I'm doing well. BigBlueButton. It's been out for 13 years. We focused on one market, which was online learning, virtual classes, and it's grown tremendously in the last 2 years, and it has consumed my life for the last 13 years or so. So that's kind of the summary of it.
Yeah, but consumed in a good way. In a good way, right? Yeah, for sure. What we want to talk about today, I'd love for you to give us, a brief update on BigBlueButton and sort of, you and I have talked several times over the last 24 months here, just sort of how BigBlueButton has exploded, how BlindSide Networks has really grown, these kinds of things. I'd love to get an update there to kick us off, but then I want to talk about, the open source universe, challenges in online learning, these kinds of things. So why don't we start there? What's the latest and greatest here in March 2022 about the BBB?
Right. So it's been a journey for us. Of course, when COVID hit, all the schools went online. Well, all of them. And there was a tremendous growth in BigBlueButton. We saw some very large deployments in Germany. The state of Germany, Baden-Württemberg, deployed 4,000 BigBlueButton servers to support 185,000 concurrent students and teachers. Recently, the French Ministry of Education has standardized on using BigBlueButton, the country of France, for its internal webinar system. And we have been cooking along in terms of the product. When I think back, it was almost 2 years ago that we shut down our offices and everybody started working at home. It was early March. And that time was very vivid for me because that's when our hosting environment, we had this tsunami of people come towards us. In that time, I've lost track of how many updates we've made to BigBlueButton, but we've unlike like a video conferencing system that, just sends media, we've really focused on continuing to drive home the value and deepen the value for teachers and students. So we had three things. It's the integration, engagement, and analytics. That's how we look at the world from the teacher's point of view. How deeply can we be integrated into the environment that students and teachers are using, like the LMS? So the latest and greatest, probably most of you may know or maybe listening, Moodle 4.0 is almost coming out. I think that was been the phrase for the last few months, but I think it's almost coming out now. And I saw the tweet, I saw the message go out this morning about the open testing, and that they're going into the full court press for the last push. They have a new plugin. They have the first plugin that's now being merged into the Moodle core, and that's the BigBlueButton plugin. So Moodle being the source for, I think, over half the world's learning management systems, will have built-in BigBlueButton integration at its core. And what does that mean? It means that everyone will have access to BigBlueButton out of the box. So I wear two hats. I'm the product manager for BigBlueButton, the open source, and I'm also the CEO for BlindSide Networks. And so BlindSide Networks will be basically providing a pool of free servers, free BigBlueButton servers, that if you fire up Moodle 4.0, you'll see the BigBlueButton integration. You'll see it has some credentials to come to one of our free servers. You're welcome to try BigBlueButton out. Now, it's not production. We would say it's like 1 hour maximum recording, 25 users or less. Recordings will expire after 7 days, but it's meant for you to try it out. And our experience is that even though there's Teams and Zoom and Meet, and they're all over the place, we just continue focusing on one market, online learning. Our target users are teachers and students. And we know that if a teacher has a chance to try out BigBlueButton, you can see the difference in terms of the deep engagement, in this case with Moodle, but it could be the same with, we're embedded natively into Canvas, we're embedded natively into Genzabar, we're embedded natively into Schoology. These are not LTI integrations. This is code in the core product. And what that does is it gives us a bit of an advantage. Like for example, in the Canvas integration, you can use the Canvas properties to say, do you want to be notified when a new recording is available? Like it's part of the Canvas code base. And the integration with Moodle, I think, is going to enable us to do even deeper integration. So I said there was integration, engagement, and analytics. Engagement obviously is during the live class. The teacher wants to set up an effective learning environment. They want to teach content to the students and assess during the class, are the students getting what I'm doing? Right. And during the teaching, if you think about constructivism, you need to have people involved. The brain is a muscle. If I just sat and watched, Stephen talk in a YouTube video, that might be entertaining, but if I can interact, or if I can interact with a teacher during the class, then the teacher can make sure that I'm applying my brain, learning. It's effort, right? It's like an extra muscle. And so the integration, engagement, and the last part is analytics. And we recently added to a latest release a live dashboard, which tells the instructor basically the answers to 3 questions. Who's in my class? And we'll give you the exact time. And this updates every 10 seconds. So you'd open up in a new window. So you're in the BigBlueButton. As a teacher can open up something called a Learning Analytics Dashboard. It opens up. You can see who's in the session, how long they've been there. And if someone joined for a minute and left for 30 minutes and come back for a minute, we'll show them they're only there for 2 minutes. You can see what the students are doing during the session in terms of like how long they're talking, how many chat messages, how many times they raise their hand, emojis. And this is data that's coming at you live, but cognitively, the teacher can't remember all of this.
Sure.
So it's who's been in the session, who's been active or engaged. And the last bit is what are the responses to all the polls? And from that, you can kind of tell who's learning. So if you're teaching a class online, it's 2 hours, you've covered a bunch of topics, and you want to just ask a couple quick poll questions, which we try to make it very easy to do in BigBlueButton. Like your slide can actually have like a title at the top and like ABCD, and we'll pick it up that's an ABCD poll and give you a button labeled ABCD. You can click, get a response back from people, and maybe you have a couple slides. And then in the Learning Analytics dashboard, we'll show you all the results.
Cool.
So you can see, is there a particular question you asked that everybody just missed on? Or is there one student that a couple students got everything wrong, which case maybe those students need a little bit more help? from the student's point of view, like what is the difference between watching a live video or watching a video and engaging in a live class?
Mm-hmm.
You get a sense that the teacher, hopefully you get a sense the teacher cares about you. The teacher is aware and they care. So think about that live class. You just asked 4 questions after sharing 30 minutes of content. 2 students are really struggling. They missed on all of it. If at that point you were aware of that and you could say, hey, Kathy, look, let's think about this as a different way. Or look, I'm going to give you guys a different way to think about this because I see there's 2 students that struggled for a moment. Or if we ever get to the point, like you do a quick private chat with someone, say, hey, I'm going to give you a different explanation in a few minutes. What's the message to the teacher or to the student? The teacher is aware, they care, and I'm getting some one-on-one time. So through integration to make it easy for the teacher to jump in and out of an online class, engagement, lots of ways to engage, to work that brain, and assessment. The biggest thing is we did the live learning analytics dashboard that basically acts as a co-pilot for the teacher, try to reduce their cognitive load and just highlight the data is coming at them, but just highlight it in a summary format so they could assess how the class is doing and how students are doing.
Fantastic. Thanks for that update. Really appreciate it. And you also have teed me up great for kind of where I want to take us first in this conversation. Before I do that, though, I want to remind everyone we are live here on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube. And, we love seeing questions. The past couple of conversations, we've had a couple of great questions, which have taken us down unexpected rabbit holes. So if you are listening, please do throw them in the chat there. We do see them and we'll be happy to respond. Fred, you were talking about, essentially, you've teed it up that we have created a learning enablement environment, right? In the online space, like we're enabling these teachers to create a learning experience that could be engaging, and we can understand what's going on, those kinds of things. What are the challenges that are still happening now that we're 2 years in, and hybrid is the name of the game for anyone who's in instruction or in learning right now, even though it's become sort of normal to interact like this. What are the challenges that you see and that you like to sort of bring up as a red flag that you're thinking about addressing?
Right. So, we're all using a product as given to us, right? So, do we modify how we interact with the product, or does the product modify how it interacts with us? And I'll give you an example. So 2 years ago, everybody went online. I think the phrase that's been termed is emergency remote teaching, ERT. It sounds like an emergency in just an accurate letters. A lot of people pulled or reached for the tool that was available to them, which was a video conferencing system. And that's fine. It was emergency. You had to get online with what you got, right? So we may have taken a slide or a book that we used in the physical classroom and held it up to the screen saying, hey, you guys remember this, right? Because that's all we had. Right. We had video. So the analogy I like to think of is, imagine Moodle didn't exist. And then 2 years ago, it's like, oh my God, I've got to put my class online. And you reach for WordPress. So not to slag WordPress, but WordPress is very good at making web pages. You can make the pages look very good. Does WordPress have any knowledge of what the teachers and students are trying to accomplish? No, it'd be zero, right? Does the video conferencing system have any knowledge about what the teachers and students are trying to accomplish? None. So what I think a lot about is the people did what they had to do, but we are not at a place yet where I think a virtual classroom is realized its full potential. And teachers are still in the mode of I reached for the video conferencing system and it works in many ways. I get that interpersonal part, which is an important part, right? I can make a connection to you because I can see you, which is in the physical class. But it doesn't exploit the context of what the teachers and students are trying to accomplish, right? What is the learning theory about what's going on when we're talking? What is the information in the LMS that could be useful to me, that could be brought into the virtual classroom? That, hey, maybe the LMS knows there's 2 students at risk. When I go into my virtual class, it would be great if in my 30 students, 2 of them were highlighted to say, hey, according to the LMS, based on submission of assignments, whatever, these 2 students are struggling. Okay, I don't have to remember that. The system knows that I'm in the context of learning. And then in a similar manner, what if I do some things with students and interact with them in a certain way that I would like that information to be brought forward to the next virtual class or stored back into the LMS? So I think, well, we think in the world in terms of, you can have a generic, you can use WordPress for your online courses, and they may look good, but you're going to be much better served with using a purpose-fit application that knows about teaching and learning, like Moodle, or like what we believe is BigBlueButton. And as we just, I'm an entrepreneur. I know you can't solve everything for everybody. I know the value that if you focus on one market, you can get a deep dive into that market, and you can really start to build a solution that addresses the fundamental needs. And I think that teaching online, now that we're away from like the emergency remote teaching, to let's decide how we want to teach online, and let's think about the experiences that we want teachers and students to have, and let's get a platform or product that supports the pedagogy. That's the space that we focus on. So BigBlueButton has and always has been and always will be like focused on online learning. And to do that, again, the integration with Moodle is fantastic, because I think it opens the doors up for us to some of the things I just talked about. There's lots of things we can do for engagement, and analytics is, if you can't measure it, sometimes it's hard to improve it. If we can help the teacher out in a little way during the session to be more aware of what students are struggling in, that feels like we're helping them do their job.
Have you gotten a sense that as we move to summer, move back into in-person learning, I'm watching, the people around me, both in sort of from the remote work universe, as well as in the online or the education space, there's a real desire to get back human, get human again. Yeah. Have you found that means people are kind of just dropping the mic and saying, all right, look, that was nice. Okay, we kind of figured that out,
Well, actually, I don't think they figured it out. So I think this emergency remote teaching, we went online. I'm in a video conferencing system. I'm holding my page up to the screen or my textbook or whatever. Is this working for me? Probably not, right? Yeah. But I have no choice. Right. So everybody jumped online with the tool that was available to them, the tools that were available. They did their best, and no surprising, it wasn't a great success for students. Did they feel like the teacher was aware of them like they did in the class? Probably not. This, from doing there's a role at schools called instructional designers. What are they doing? They're there to help the teacher map the content and the curriculum they have in a physical class into like a Moodle or an online session, right? It's different. There was no instructional technology that was mapping your physical experience to the virtual class. You just had to do it. So I think it's absolutely important to get back face to face. Virtual classrooms are not meant to replace, but in the same way, like Moodle is not meant to replace, something else you're already doing, like the physical classroom. Moodle complements the first physical class. Like there are just things that are easier when you have Moodle. I'll use Moodle, but I could use Canvas or Schoology or anything, any LMS. I want to see the virtual classroom in the role where there is a time when I connect to people. And if you think to traditional classes, like when you and I went to school, what do you think the answer would have been if we said to the teacher, hey, can I get a recording for this class after you're done?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, what? Yeah. Right? Or look, I can't drive to the school. Can you call me at home and I'll just do a virtual office hour with you?
Right.
Like, well, no. So the virtual class has, I think, a much larger role to play in complementing the physical classroom, and I would say enabling. Again, you and I probably grew up in a society where we could walk down the street and go to school, or take a bus or whatever. We know there are people in the world that opportunity doesn't exist.
Right.
And, they think of the Syrian refugee camps where they have 150,000 people. What is their ticket out of there? It's education. And if they don't have access to it, that's, the freedom to move around is also a challenge as well. But, you can pull yourself out if you are determined enough and have access to the ability to learn. So the virtual classroom gives that access.
And I'm just reflecting now in my own life, right? Yesterday, there was an incident at my the school that my children go to here in Mexico City, just, nothing major, but there was some damage to one of the buildings. And so the school was able to say, hey, look, we're going to shut the middle school for a day just so we can do a safety check and all that stuff. And it was an instant transformation, right? Like, because they have prepared, or, parents were prepared and whatnot. Obviously, you have to make some schedule adjustments and whatnot, maybe in your professional life or those kinds of things, but they were able to transition too. And my son didn't miss a day of school. Right. Yeah. And then, you take us to some of what we would consider some of the extreme examples, but great. But let's think about, what's happening in Ukraine right now. I mean, 3 million refugees, on the border in Poland and Hungary and other places, right? There is an awful lot of learners, adults, professional, children, whatnot, who obviously in this absolutely horrible tragedy are, right now missing out on those educational opportunities. And so this isn't, we now have the platforms to offer up those options, right? Those options for people.
And to go back to your point about everyone's looking forward to getting back to physical. Absolutely. The virtual classroom is not meant to replace a physical classroom if one such exists. It's meant to complement it. An office hour, a flipped classroom, focus groups. There was one customer we had, which they said the time they used BigBlueButton was they told their kids, look, your exam is tomorrow at 5:00. I'm going to be online from 1:00 to 3:00. Just come in and ask me anything. I'm there for you. I'll have an open session. And, it was one of the best attended sessions, right? But everyone's learning, right? There was no class that everyone had to drive to, which would have been impossible. The teacher was able to connect at the point of time where the students needed help. And that underlies what the virtual classroom should only enable. It's a medium. Yeah. And then, going back to the virtual classes for people who don't have access to it, I absolutely agree.
100%.
We have, the tools are going to get better and better. BigBlueButton is only going to get better and better. We learned a lot over the last 13 years. There's much that can be done for the online class in terms of making sure the pedagogy is underneath what we're doing. Just like Moodle based on constructivism, you think of Bloom's taxonomy or things that you want to help the learner go through the journey of, can I remember something? Do I understand? Can I apply it? Can I measure it? Can I evaluate? Can I create? How do I get them to do that in an online class so they're not sitting there just watching the screen and not getting value? There's lots of untapped opportunity. And I think instead of doing their emergency part, we're beyond that. People the virtual class will be a component of every school. I don't think any school is going to turn it off. We see an opportunity to keep making it better and better. And because we're open source, I mean, we see ourselves blossoming all around the world. Because we focus on this market, we can do things by focusing our resources on what the teacher and student needs. And I think there's kind of a rich market or rich ground in terms of analytics that we can give the teacher to help them teach better online or to be their co-pilot, I will say. You're flying a plane, there's lots of instrumentation. The co-pilot is there to kind of reduce your cognitive load and say, hey, I think there's some things that are important, or maybe there's some rough air coming up ahead, or you don't have to be you're by yourself. If BigBlueButton can be your co-pilot, then perhaps we can help you in achieving your goals as a teacher.
Take me down you've touched on it several times, but take me down the open source path. Being open source has been, it's really important to BigBlueButton. It's really important to you. What we know, the Moodle community, the open source project, writ large is people are extremely passionate about that as well. First of all, sort of give me your take on what does it mean to be open source and why it's important. And then let's talk about where things are going. Why is that continue to be important and why do we need to preserve it?
Yeah. And I think the open source road is a longer one, right? It's not hard. It's easier in some respects to say, hey, I have an idea. Let's go raise some money, put a bunch of developers on it, do it. And that's a really good model. That's not what made Linux successful. Linux started over 25 years ago, 20 years ago. It was I remember I just left university. And
I think we're talking it's 25 because it runs almost
25,
all the world.
Yeah.
It runs almost all the world's servers, right?
Yeah, actually it's right. I think it's actually probably close to 30 now. I remember 1991. Yeah. It's over 30 years. Microsoft can't do it. Like there's no conceivable way that any single company can possibly move Linux out of the box it's at. Everybody is building on top of it. And then it gets faster and better and better and accelerates. That was the vision we had behind BigBlueButton. When we started the project, this was back in 2007, there were 150 commercial web conferencing systems out there. There was very few open source ones. So the idea would be is that if you build a community around the product, you have a commonwealth of commercial companies, users, developers, educational institutions, and they're all seeing the value of continuing to improve it because they all get back. And then that just feeds on itself, or that compounds itself. The more people who are contributing, the faster it improves, the more people contribute because more people are using it and so on. That was our model. When we started off the project, I think back to 10 years ago, and we were Flash based way back.
Whoa.
Oh yeah, but it was possible to do stuff in Flash, and then the browsers eventually became good enough that you didn't need Flash running anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It took them a couple of years, but they got there. But yes, we were able to make it better and better. We did it as an open source. We had a community of people. We had like 500 people on our developer mailing list, 1,000. Now it's over 2,500 developers on our developer mailing list. There used to be 1 or 2 people contributing to GitHub. We've accepted and reviewed from over 150 developers that have contributed improvements. So for us, what it means is that BlindSide Networks and the companies around BigBlueButton have the mindset where we develop in the open source and then we provide hosting to generate revenue as commercial companies. But the open source has enabled so many people around the world to contribute. The product is localized into 55 languages now. I only speak one, right? But the community, but through Transifex, anybody can contribute a localization. It supports right to left. That was contributed by a member of community. We have a lot of work that goes on accessibility that is also reviewed and contributed. And in terms of looking through security of the software, all the code is there, right? So over the years, we've gotten people to do responsible disclosures to us to say, hey, I think I found something. And we're like, yeah, I think you're right. Okay, we're going to fix that. So it enables BigBlueButton to have an outsized momentum and place as opposed to it was just a one company behind it. And I would go back to Linux, right? Doesn't matter how big you are as a company. If you can get enough momentum behind your open source project, you can become a standard. And when I look at the success we've had over the last 13 years, Canvas has built us into the core. Schoology has built us into our core. Moodle is now building us into their core. D2L built us into their core. They actually took the open source version and rebranded it, which I was pleased as anything. And there are a couple second tier other LMSs out there that have all built us into the core. So they did that, I think, partly because it's open source and they knew they had the ability to do it.
So where does, talk to me about, maybe go a little bit more philosophical on me in terms of data protection, in terms of, your ability to not, have an investor oversee, what you're doing, control the product. Like I feel like there's many people who look at the open source universe and say, look, this just kind of can go anywhere it wants. It's anarchy. It could get, kind of goes out of control. Where is my data? Like, talk to me about those pieces for a second.
Yeah. So this was an unintended benefit of being open source. Like GDPR is very important to people. So data privacy, and to be able to host the data inside your own company or country, digital sovereignty. So these two things have driven a huge amount of interest towards BigBlueButton, and Germany and France being two countries of note, because they could have everything there. They saw all the code, it hosted internally, and so they could build the entire ecosystem around it. And it's an open source project. We solved the problem that they were looking for, to be able to teach online. And now we have, in terms of the open source model, we have organizations from both these countries and others coming back to us and saying, okay, this is great. You're doing 95% of what we want. Our teachers have these lists of things that they'd like improve. So you look at the two lists and go, oh, there's a lot of commonality there. And they're like, how do we accelerate this? So that's one benefit of the open source business model is, you can generate revenue through traditional open source. There's two traditional ways. You provide hosting, so software as a service, right? Or people look upon you to help them accelerate or implement features. So you can generate revenue from professional services. It's how BlindSide Networks and other companies in the ecosystem around BigBlueButton have grown. And so having it as an open source philosophically gives a country like Germany the ability to own, like they're running Moodle inside of Germany because that's important to them. They're running BigBlueButton inside of Germany. So in a similar way, the synchronous and asynchronous, they have end to end. And from the point of view of an open source project, there's no greater validation as to when someone designs you into their process or their product. And having been designed into a lot of schools now around the world, and a good chunk of them are coming back and giving back to the project. I don't measure it, but I look, if you send us a Transifex or bug report or disclosure in terms of some issues with accessibility or something, we all win because we'll fix it and the product will improve. So good for them, digital sovereignty, data protection, and good for us in terms of it. They're encouraged to give back because it's possible to give back. They can send us a pull request. We have a lot of we have a problem now where we have that's not a problem. We have a growing community, and it's starting to get diverse. When I think of Linux, I mean, there was Linus, and then he has like lieutenants that handle the various subsystems. We've essentially split up into groups now where some people are really focused on whiteboard, others on record and playback. And these things are all happening in parallel with people around the world contributing to it. So it's good for them and it's good for us.
That's cool. You kind of taken me to the third part that I wanted to talk to you about today. How do you manage the community? Like, how do you keep it alive? I assume, I meet entrepreneurs all the time, and you hear about here's their greatest idea, and we know statistically 90% of those people or 95 of them will that the idea will fizzle or fade, or hey, here's the next greatest thing, and you hear about it for 3 months and then it kind of fizzles out and goes away. How do you keep one of these open source communities alive in 2022?
There's a couple aspects to it. One is you have to make sure it's economically viable. I watched when we started the BigBlueButton project, my co-founder Richard Alam, his thesis was on successful open source business models, and I had already started 2 companies beforehand, so I kind of knew the pitfalls, and it's not hard. It's like you have to make sure you generate revenue. So giving your software away for free doesn't mean you give your time away for free. So I think we got it right in terms of like we are able to do this project in the open source, and the companies I see around the BigBlueButton ecosystem, they've all grown. Partly because nobody knew what COVID was coming. So for better or for worse, it really it basically caused us to do probably 4 years of work in 2 years, in the last 2 years. And things just happened so much faster. Like the film strip just sped up. And there was a need, and we're all motivated to meet that need. It was our moment to say, look, the world needs a virtual classroom. We had been at BigBlueButton for 11 years at that point. It was ready. And it's why it sprung up around the world so quickly. It wasn't like we had done it for 3 years. It was been a lot of development into it so far. So, the question is, how do we manage it? I think it's become a bit easier. Like GitHub does a really good job of tracking issues and pull requests. Like that workflow was really good. We have mailing lists, just like Linux. So 2,500 people on our mailing list. Sometimes I'll wake up in the morning and there's quite a few messages that happened. I'm in North America. I'm in Canada. So, Germany, France, they have a couple hours ahead of me. But no, there's as I said earlier, we've kind of broken more up into teams. And I still have the overall product management of it. But there are people who are really good now at various areas, like the audio, the video, the whiteboard, all these things that are now improving in parallel. And I think the community realizes that, there's a core group of developers. So when we do get submissions, they tend to be pretty good. Like, here's a description, and we have guidelines in terms of how people can contribute. And a lot of times, finding bugs, people are, here's the bug, here's a video of the bug, here's a step for you to reproduce. And we're like, man, that just saved us half the time. And so I think we're able to focus more on things that are going to be more beneficial because we have a pretty good idea of what we need to do in the product. I mean, we've listened to so many teachers, and we have a community willing to help us out. And we have a platform that, like, the open source project runs pretty well. And I have to say too, like, if you think about 10 years ago when we started the BigBlueButton, you know, where the browsers were, where computers were, and where the internet was. And now think of where it is today. Like Chrome and Firefox are amazing platforms. The computers like the Apple M1 chip, you know, my MacBook Air, it just runs amazingly, right? And so you just keep thinking like, what's the next 2 years going to be like? The 4 years, the internet, 5G. So we have this incredible little platform that we're building on top of that is only going to get better and better. And then really and then we have this platform of BigBlueButton that we built out that has all these components and capabilities, and it just keeps improving at an accelerating rate. You know, my point of view from a project manager point of view is just keep focused on the teachers and the students and those integration, engagement, and analytics. And I've learned this from my past experience as an entrepreneur. If you do too many things, you don't do them all well. You don't do any of them well. But if you focus,
yes,
and you do that for a really long period of time, you know, you can tend to carve out some benefit. And it, again, the pandemic just made it so that the little market that we were working in became a very big market.
Fantastic. I want to put this question on the table. We have one question that came in the chat, and I'll be interested to hear what your response is to it, because it kind of makes the case for, you know, open source gone awry, where, and I'm not going to even try to pronounce this name, which is Envahisuur Signoi. So it says, in a time of sanctions and service denials, open source technologies can continue to quote unquote help the enemy, sort of, you know, so to speak. Is there a way that we can monitor those, you know, the usage of open source technology, or is there anything we can do about that?
So this can be applied to everything. Like I'll use Linux as an example again. I mean, Linux is probably used inside of closed caption cameras that are monitoring, you know, monitoring individuals in society for probably not a very good purpose. It's a tool. And I like to think of, I thought a lot about this in terms of like social media and our ability to communicate. Having the ability to, like you and I, to connect right now, or for a student in Afghanistan to be able to get a training, to join a master's class in mathematics where she can understand like higher order math and maybe someday teach. These are all enabled by open source projects. I mean, Linux runs the world. Linux is underpinning almost all of it. The browsers enable like what we're doing right now. Like we did not have to install a plugin. I mean, I say that because most people today will be like, well, of course we don't. Well, no, you needed to a couple of years ago, right? It just got a lot of better. But all of these things can be used for other purposes, right? Social media can be used to, you know, influence people who are not skeptical, right?
Sure. Almost anything can be weaponized, you know, at the end of the day, right?
So from the open source point of view, no. Like we, you know, BigBlueButton is a virtual classroom system. I'm trying to think of other open source tools. There was a good example was there are tools out there that will scan for vulnerabilities in servers to tell the administrators, hey, you have some vulnerabilities, you need to put a firewall in place and so on. Those same tools could be pointed at, you know, a server from someone who wasn't expecting to be scanned and who wasn't aware of the vulnerabilities, and a hacker could use that to exploit it. So I think no, but I like to believe that in a world where we are more connected and that we are stronger as a community.
Oh, speaking of,
I'll just shoot him a message on Slack there.
all right, yeah, I think we just had. I hope it's not a hiccup from the Mexico side here, which sometimes happens. But I can still see myself, and I'm still online, so I'm thinking Fred has hit a sunspot, which sometimes happens. But I really do want to get his answer to this question here, or to tie up his answer here.
I just shot him a message, so we'll get him right back in here ASAP.
Thank you very much, Brendan. Folks, just want to let you know we are live, and sometimes when you're live, you know, things go awry. But you know, our guest today is Fred Dixon of BigBlueButton fame, of BlindSide Networks. He's the founder of BlindSide Networks, and he's the project manager of BigBlueButton. And we were talking about really kind of all things open source. You know, the open source manifesto, so to speak, greater, you know, in a greater definition, data security, data privacy. And we were just kind of talking about one of our, somebody who was listening, one of their questions about, how do we prevent open source tools from being used nefariously? I'm not sure if we're going to get Fred back here. So we'll see. We'll give him another minute, but we were lucky to have a solid 45-minute talk there. And if we can't get him back in a few seconds here, I'll just kind of wrap us all up, but let's see what happens. If not, I'll remind you right now that my name's Laddick and I'm talking to you from OpenLMS. This is the eLearn podcast and the eLearn hot seat. And just want to remind everybody, this year, instead of doing the eLearning Success Summit, which was one event, we're doing something called the eLearn Success Series. And we had our first session, which was called the Designer Session in February. And that session was focused on instructional design and how do you design great learning experiences. I think I may have Fred back. Our next session is coming up on May 4th, which is our instructor session. So we're going to be talking about all things around, being a better instructor, creating the learning experience better through the process of instruction. We have some great things around accessibility, around neurodiversity, around empathy, around, just essentially creating like that classroom that, learners love to be in. And I see Fred here. Oh, there he is. Are we back, Fred? Can you hear me?
Yeah, my internet is flapping right now.
No worries.
I literally,
I've explained to everybody, when you fly without a net and you're on the interwebs, that's just what happens. That's how it works.
No, it just went out. So I'll switch back to my phone. But look, I was going to make one philosophical.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, wrap up your thought there. Wrap up your thought, because I was going to say we were kind of coming to the end there, but let's tie it in a bow.
Okay, let's leave it on a positive note. Look, the technology has enabled a much more connected world. I believe it's lifting the opportunities for so many people. I had a chance to talk with a not-for-profit in Bangladesh, which was using bringing kids who were living in, basically it's called like tents, bring them into a class, teach them some social networking tools, teach them how to do some basic graphic design. Through Fiverr, they were able to get some projects going. And some of the kids were now able to earn 4 or 5 times what their parents were earning. Wow, that's life-changing to them, right? Enabled by technology and internet. So I believe this is I believe in the entrepreneurial opportunities of what virtual classrooms provide, but I'm really all in on the social benefit of what we can do for BigBlueButton. And to see it used around the world only encourages us to make it better for teachers and students everywhere.
Yeah, I thank you so much. I really appreciate you bringing that. And I want to also offer up on the positive note, one thing that we tend to think of, these negative, these externalities or these negative pieces, these negative, these bad actors in an open source project or in a project like this. Here's the good news as well. The world is only more visible and it's only more open and it's only more, transparent every day. And so I think, it could be a call to action to our listener there who asked the question, and to ourselves as well. It's like, we got to call out those bad actors. We got to do something about it, because we know as the greater good, those people can be shut down. It's just, it takes us all raising our hand and shutting them down. Right. That's our responsibility as the larger community.
I would agree with that 100%. We cannot be viewers. We have to participate in society. It takes a village to raise a family. We live in a world where we're now more connected. It is incumbent upon all of us to take action where we see inequalities or prejudice or hate. We only embolden other people if they have the same platform that we have and they use it and we don't.
Right. Exactly. On that note, who knew this was going to become power to the people? But Fred Dixon, CEO of BlindSide Networks and product manager of BigBlueButton. As always, it's a super pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for sharing your views today, and I will look forward to the next time we get to speak.
Thanks a lot, Stephen. Take care.
Ciao. Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the eLearning Podcast. If you like what you heard, please do me the favor of following us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or whichever social media you prefer. Also, if you're interested in diving deeper on e-learning, I encourage you to get your free ticket to the eLearning Success Summit, where there are more than 70 hours of presentations on best practices. Just go to elearningsuccesssummit.com. And then finally, for the latest news, information, and resources about e-learning, come subscribe to our newsletter at lmspulse.com. Thanks.